To order, and first order of business is to welcome our new member, Derek Peterson.
Thank you.
Do you want to take a minute to introduce yourself and tell everybody what you've been up to in town lately? And
been a resident for about 16 years.
that all?
I have three girls, 13, 10, and 7, all in the Simsbury school system. I work locally for a pension fund advisor. We invest in commercial real estate, and invest pension fund money in commercial real estate. I've served on many boards here in Simsbury, Economic Development Commission, the Zoning Commission, as you mentioned, Linda, the Tax Abatement Commission, and also was on the subcommittee to help create the PAD, whether that's a good thing or bad thing. I took part in that. So yeah, I'm an active member here in town, and look forward to working with you all. And it's with great humility that I accept the appointment from the Board of Selectmen to be here. And thanks for the opportunity.
Good to have you aboard, and I didn't know what your work was, so I'm glad to hear it's financial.
Yes.
Be a good skill set to have. So,
Linda, can I just get recognized? Sure. I was looking at the agenda. Can we move the election of the chair up to after the pledge?
is there a reason you need to do that?
Well, I think it makes, if we're going to be having an election, to do it at the beginning of the meeting, not at the end of the meeting. Well, so I'd like to make a motion to do that, to move it up to item after the Pledge of Allegiance.
Before the Pledge of Allegiance.
Before or after?
Okay.
After I said.
Okay, after the pledge.
Is it that urgent?
Well, I just think it makes sense.
Can you not wait 10 minutes?
Well, it's not 10 minutes.
It's an hour.
There's a whole bunch
If
of
it
business.
makes somebody feel better, fine.
Okay.
Does anyone want to second that?
Second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Okay, let's have the election of the new board chair.
After the pledge.
Go ahead.
I pledge allegiance to the
flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Personally, I think that's petty. Do we have any nominations?
So I'd like to make the nomination for Rob Pomeroy as chairman of the Board of Finance.
I'll second that.
Any discussion?
I take it it's preordained, so there's really no discussion.
All in favor?
I guess I could only hope that, I don't know all about your background and expertise, but Barb had unique expertise relative to municipal finance, which I didn't realize until, after she'd already been on the board for a time. Moira and I are lawyers. We have now some financial expertise here. I don't know what your expertise is. In the best of all worlds, frankly, it would have been nice, I think, to have had a nomination based on who had been on this board for a significant period of time, who also has the background from a legislative perspective, which Linda has, but I see it's a partisan vote. So I'm happy to support a nomination, I guess, that has been preordained, but it would be nice if we could have group discussion about what was best for the town before making the decision.
And I'd just like to add, I think, Rob brings a different perspective, and he's a CEO of his own company who's well-versed in finance, and I think the town will be well served under his leadership, and hence the nomination.
Rob, anything you want to?
Well, I'm surprised that I do. I am chairman and CEO of a $250 million company. I manage assets of $500 million. I understand finance, been in finance all my life, making decisions based on balance sheets and profit and losses and expenses, and I've been in a leadership role for that. So I think I'm extremely qualified to do this. I do take seriously your comments. I think it is one of the challenges for our board is that over the last 3 years, we've lost a lot of continuity and institutional knowledge about the town and the budgets with when Peter Askham and Nick Mason left 2 years or whenever it was, and now with Barb. I think it's a real challenge for all of us to reach out to those people that are still in town that have worked on the board and be sure that we are understanding what's going on and what the context of all of this is, retrospectively. I think that's very, very important, and I challenge each of us. I would challenge each of us to do that, whatever our role is. I also think that this, what partisan is sort of a tough word. I think what we're looking for is the right leadership for the town, and I hope that with my experience leading the zoning commission that I have a lot of municipal experience here as well, where I can bring that to bear. I will be the first to tell you that I have a lot to learn about some of the specifics of Funda County, but I also believe that I can do a very good job working closely with Sean and the staff, as well as with each of you, to be sure that we are not missing anything and that we get input from all sides of the town.
I appreciate that. And I don't even know if Linda is interested. It's just that it was preordained. I haven't seen Maura for quite a while. I'm glad she's able to get to this meeting. We've had a problem with attendance at these meetings, and I knew Maura would be here today because I knew there was a vote. And so I just hope that people are serving on this commission can get here to the meetings, hopefully with some greater consistency, or not serve. I can count on one hand the number of meetings I've missed, and I'm going into my 6th year now. I don't plan to rerun. I had no interest in being the chair. I chaired committees before in the town. It's a lot of work, and you have as well. It's a lot of work. There's a big difference between running a corporation and running a town, running a school board. So I guess if you have the time and energy and commitment and you can dedicate that, great. And I will support the nomination. I just thought it would be useful to have some discussion, and again, I don't know if Linda was interested, but I certainly think her experience having run major operations in corporate America, as well as her legislative experience, would have also served the town well. I hope that if she will at least consider the vice chair role when you're not here.
Well, let me interject that, given that I'm now happily retired and do a fair amount of travel, I did talk with Rob, and I didn't want to be chair. Okay. So I'm glad that he's stepping up. I hope that this little thing about an hour worth of me being chaired is not a signal of how partisan it's going to be in the future, and I don't expect it will be, because Rob and I have talked, and I've certainly committed to work closely with him, as I did with Barb, and it was never partisan with Barb. So I'm hopeful that that will not come in the future, and I don't expect with Rob that it will. So I would move that we move along to the vote and carry on, because we have the business of the town to attend to.
Absolutely.
Everybody okay with that? Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Take it away, Rob.
All right. Great. Just a couple of things I'd like to say to start. One, I want to thank Linda first, because she did reach out to me as soon as we knew that Barb was leaving, and we did discuss this not long after. I think some of us were surprised by how sort of quickly and that Barb's house sold and that she needed to move. But I also want to thank her for her very dedicated service to the town and a lot of knowledge and context that she brought to this process, and worked with Barb and Public and Town Committee and other boards, and she knows a lot and had a great love for this town, and I think she served us very well. We want to be sure we thank her on the record. So why don't we move forward then with the business of the town, and We have a lot of work to do as a board as we get just a small break here before we dive in January and February for the budgeting process. But it's going to be challenging for all of us, relatively new members as well as those that have been here for a while. So I'll ask all of you to support that. All right, on to the approval of the minutes. Oh, should we do the Pledge of Allegiance? Did we do that?
We did it.
I thought we did.
We did.
Did we?
You can do it again. I mean,
We are still pledging allegiance.
Okay. Rough day.
And it hasn't changed since last month, so we still all know we're still Americans.
Yes.
Okay, so anyone have any comments on the minutes from the both meetings, the October 18th and the November 15th?
Yes.
Go ahead, Lynn.
Well, but you go, because it's your name that's misspelled.
Yeah, no, exactly. So I know we have a David Bloom, I think, on one of our commissions, Blume. So anyway, Blumenthal, so just down,
Yeah, that's in number 4
yeah.
in the motion.
And the other change I had was on item 7.
Which minutes are we on?
Oh, I'm sorry. So these are the October 18th minutes first. And then the only change I had was on item 7, where Mr. Kimberly reminded the board that Hammond School is only 3 months into the current fiscal year. They have not gone through the typical process where department heads come up with their needs and present to the Board of Selectmen. I think it would be, or Board of Education as applicable, because I think we're looking at both boards.
What paragraph was that? Jeff?
Second paragraph of
Bottom of
number
page
7, yeah. But excellent job, once again, on the minutes. I can't tell you how blessed we are to have such good minutes of late. Thank you.
I had one comment also.
Which that?
On October 18th, item number 5, the second sentence, it's not because it's my name there, but the sentence doesn't actually make sense. I didn't know what it meant.
I didn't know what it meant when you said it, but no, kidding.
She reported that she heard through a message from fellow BOF member Linda Schofield indicating that she thought it isn't the grammar, and it just doesn't. I wasn't here at that meeting, so somebody who was should reinterpret that, but that sentence needs a little help. I think what she's saying, you could just take out from the word through to the word thought. She reported that she heard it was for spend to save investments. Doesn't matter that she heard it from me.
Right.
All right, why don't we make that change?
Sounds good.
I'll just give you my copy if you want, Pam.
All right, so any other comments? All right, and that's on both, how about for the 15th? I was not here for that meeting.
I had no changes.
Everything else all right?
We have no
All right,
changes.
So we'll adopt those minutes with those minor changes.
Do you want a motion?
Sure.
I move we adopt both minutes with those changes.
Second. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Next up is a presentation of the Henry James Phase 3 capital project.
I'm joined here to do a little bit of a tag team presentation with Principal Brian White, who many of you saw at the tri-board meeting. He was one of the audience members there. And we are going to, just giving a little bit of context, we discussed at the end of the tri-board meeting that, you were interested, the board was interested for a number of prior meetings of trying to start the process earlier, given that this was the largest project on our 6-year capital plan. We suggested that it would make sense to give that presentation to you this evening. We have been working, both Brian and I, with the architectural firm of Castle Booz on the Phase 2 project. So just as a quick review for everybody, our first phase really focused on the main office and the first floor hallway. Our second phase is focusing more on the second floor and some areas of the first floor also. And that has been funded, and as a part of that capital funding, a small amount of the scope of work for Castle Blues was to help refine the Phase 3 scope further. So we've sort of been working in a parallel fashion, both on Phase 2, which we're getting ready to go out to bid, and we've gone to the state, and we're getting ready for the formal step of getting the state blessing to go out to bid for this project, which is eligible for state, partial state reimbursement. So now we're going to talk a little bit about Phase 3, and in particular, we're just trying to explain the needs of what was in the scope of work at this point in time, knowing that this is not a final presentation. In fact, this is based on what we shared with the board earlier this fall. So we're going to start from the beginning of that. And just to highlight the major elements of Phase 3, it's always been about a new library media center, about changing our classroom for science, the way we currently have them structured, to something called a classroom lab that allows for greater flexibility. The auditorium was the most recent element that was part of the educational specifications that we're working on for this project. And also you'll see, and we're going to highlight it from a visual nature, there's also a large area in the tech ed and family and consumer science wing that really needs to be updated also, that has not been touched. Mostly, there are some areas of the building that have been touched, but most of this is from 1957. Thus, the need for some of our general classrooms to have some touch-up. We're just talking about things like flooring and ceiling areas, perhaps lighting, kitchen and bathrooms. And one of the key aspects is to finish what we're starting, which is the the sprinkler system for this building. And so that's a significant part of the cost also. So this cost estimate of a little over $22.8 million came about this past summer. The Board of Ed looked at several different schemes, and this was the version that they were most comfortable with, and now we're working to develop a bit further. So before I turn it over to Brian to speak to the need and give you the chance to ask questions about it, I wanted to just highlight just the visuals on this sketch to orient you. So for the Library Media Center, this would be an addition off of the back behind what used to be the main office. This version, which we're modifying and working with the folks at Castle Booze to bring this forward in the very near future to show a little bit more higher level design development. This auditorium, in fact, we're looking to orient it in a different way, but that's the location of that. The Tech Ed Family Consumer Science Wing is here, and the current library is these three classrooms here. You can see how that relates in size to what is proposed here. And then the orange areas are what would be the classroom lab science classrooms. So we're actually creating a larger footprint and having to impact the size of some structural walls. So that's a quick visual overview, and I'm going to let Brian speak a little bit more about why, and that's probably a good time to pass this out.
Burke, can you just go back to that for a second? It's the only two things that are additional size or expanding the
New
footprint
square footage, correct.
it are the Library Media Center and the auditorium.
Correct.
Everything else is within the footprint.
Exactly.
Okay, just wanted to make sure.
And what I'm
Understood.
handing out is, we have a nice color version on the board website under Henry James. This is a document that will supplement what you see, that you can refer back to, just helping to explain in terms of, yes. It comes up at the end. All right, we could do that. All right, Brian.
The light blue at the top, that's existing space?
This wing here, yes, that is
That's
all
where the
the
shop-
Tech Ed wing, yes,
Yeah,
in
okay.
fact, yeah, the shop.
Okay.
Yeah, that's why I
And
asked. I was looking at the
It's
same
definitely one of
thing.
those areas that needs to be renovated.
Well, good evening, everybody. It's a pleasure to be here just to share a little bit more in detail with you about our proposal to improve the middle school here in Simsbury. We've actually spent a great deal of time over the past couple of years in conversations Burke had mentioned with architects, but also with the faculty and staff of Henry James, other administrators and educators in district to really identify what we feel we need as a middle school to remain competitive and to really ensure that we're providing our students with the best educational opportunities that we can, but also providing our students with an education that's appropriate given the demands of the modern classroom. And so really we've talked a lot thematically, and you have the brochure in front of you. We're presently operating a modern middle school within a high school that was conceived of in 1957. And so for those of you that are familiar with the facility, we did offer a tour of the facility for many of the members of this board about a year or so ago. Many aspects of our building has been untouched since the 50s. I mean, the building's in good maintenance and condition, but the facility itself is quite old and dated. And so a lot of what we'll share with you this evening is just proposals that we believe will make it a much better middle school and more functional to meet our current need. And so, as Burke mentioned, this project has been spoken about now for about 10 years here in town. The library was always a sort of a centerpiece to that conversation about improving our middle school. Presently, we have a library that's around 2,750 square feet. To put that in context, the current enrollment at Henry James is just at about 700. We can accommodate a class of about 25 students at one time. When you consider that, just from a very basic usage standpoint, it's very limiting in terms of access to that library during the school day. So really looking to create a library space that can accommodate more than one class at a time and still meet general circulation needs is a very basic thing that we're looking to accomplish. The proposal that you have in front of you has a proposal for a new library space that would be approximately 5,800 square feet, and we believe that that size would allow us to accomplish a lot of the aims that are listed in that See the Need brochure.
If that's entirely new construction, that would be eligible for the maximum state funding? I mean, would that be deemed new construction? That would be deemed new construction, would that be eligible for the maximum state reimbursement, to the extent that it exists?
Well, there is not a, because you did just to the library. The way we are working with the state on this is that you may have read that there are some changes that are supposed to take place to school construction projects effective July 1st. Because we have met with the state now on phases 1, 2, and we spoke about phase 3, they indicated to us that they were not going to change the rate on us, that it would not be fair since we've really been phasing this project. But there's always ineligible costs in any project. So a new part of the building would, generally speaking, be the most fully eligible, whereas some other aspects of this project they would deem to be just maintenance, and they don't fund things that are truly just maintenance. So they get to just, they get to interpret what are those categories, and that's part of the experience that both the architects and myself now has from working with the folks at the state.
So can you just elaborate on that a little bit more, Burke? Like what percentage roughly do you get for new versus old, or maintenance?
It isn't a new versus old. If you're truly doing a brand new project, they consider that new construction. There's something called renovate as new, and they have certain categories and percentages. We can't do that under our project. We actually looked at that. So it is a renovation project. There are some code issues that, because we point out that we would be able to meet current code, sometimes that makes something that would have been just maintenance into a partially reimbursable part of that project. The town's reimbursement rate for 15-16 was about roughly 32.5%. Ironically, that reimbursement percentage listed for 16-17 has actually gone up to about 35%. But again, you have to look at the net project of, are there ineligible costs, and are there factors that reduce that? So we've been conservative, Sean and I, in terms of, as we're building estimates for the 6-year CIP, we've been conservative in that process.
So just to make sure I understand, the new part of the construction would be eligible for somewhere in the 32 to 35%, and the other renovations would not be eligible for state money?
There are essentially two buckets. They will deem what is ineligible and what's eligible. So I can't say it's just simply anything.
Roughly.
It isn't just new construction. There is renovation in existing areas that's fully eligible.
Okay.
To try to better answer your question. It's when you're creating a new program need, as we're trying to do with the science classrooms and things of that nature, creating a new program space. That's not just maintenance. That's actually creating something that has an instructional purpose, and that's why they require the educational specifications process.
Okay, but the maximum is the 35-ish?
Correct.
Okay.
Correct.
So just to be clear for people that might be watching, so it's roughly a third of what the state deems as eligible expenses, not a third of the entire project is
Right.
reimbursable?
Correct.
Okay, I'll make sure
And
that
that's,
distinction
like I said,
is-
that's what we've
Yeah.
used from a 6-year CIP point of view. We always have to estimate what those reimbursement percentages might be. And in looking at these most recent models, we've not used that, we've not tried to assume that the entire project would be at that percentage. We've tried to be
And looking at the entire project, what's your guesstimate
Thank you.
as to what percentage of the project is going to be matchable? But you've done some projections, so rough guess.
I mean, I think our net reimbursement percentage will probably work out closer to 29 or 30%.
So you,
Yeah, no, we're on the same.
so you're thinking that 29 or 30% of the entire project will be deemed to be reimbursable by the state?
No,
Will
I'm
be
saying,
deemed to meet
saying it
eligibility.
differently. I'm saying that.
That's what we're
out of
asking, is
out of
what
20
percentage of the
yeah.
entire
So
project
probably the
is
eligible
matchable?
portion of the project, a guesstimate, would probably be something around $22 million, let's say, would be eligible because it's not maintenance related. That would be.
But 22 million is
Is
the
the
whole
cost.
project.
22.8, I'm sorry, 22.8. Probably about 20, but about 20 roughly, because we don't
Okay,
have a lot.
so the majority of
a
it
lot
is-
maintenance. And most of it is new.
And then you would
It's new
apply what
construction.
percentage against that? The 30?
The 30,
Yeah,
the
30.
30-ish.
I'm
Shoot at
saying-
35.
Yeah, I'm saying there'll probably be some offset to that. There's a very complicated formula, so that's why I'm saying probably about 29 to 30% is my best guesstimate. That's why we're asking the architects to help us refine that as they go through in finer detail to actually update the cost estimates. It's going to be looked at a much finer level.
We're not trying to hold you to it, we're just trying to get
No,
a sense.
Yeah, it's the scope of what would be covered is more,
Yeah.
I think, more important to me than the actual, what the percentage rate happens to be, whether it's 28 or 32.
$16 million.
And we're reimbursed for that, so it gets appropriated up front and then is reimbursed later.
All of these projects, we have to get authorization for the entire
Yeah.
cost.
Right.
That is the consistent process.
Okay.
You're not hedging your bet saying, well, we think it's gonna be this, so we're only gonna, no, they require that you have to.
Okay. Go ahead.
Can I ask a quick question about the library? That's 58 on top of the 2750, or what's going to be your net area of library once the addition is?
5,800.
So that it's not
It's a new library, the old
So-
library would be repurposed, right?
Correct. And-
Oh, it'll
and
be
so-
repurposed, okay.
So in fact, and we can very quickly, so this slide here, so,
So those classrooms are your current library.
Yep.
They are literally just classrooms that are opened up.
Converted. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and so this would become, these would be made into smaller size classrooms, but there's adjustments to all of these areas. It isn't like, we're just we're just changing the existing footprint. They actually have to cut through and change the size of various classrooms.
Right, so your 25 per 2750 could be, not exponentially, but greater in the 5,800. In other words, it might not be 50 kids, it could be 60 or 75 kids that could be there at one time?
Well, that would be the hope. One of the things that we had discussed at length, really, when we were just talking in very conceptual terms about what we really needed in a library. As a middle school, we currently don't have any common spaces. And so that's something that's pretty central to the team concept. When we talk about middle schools, what we essentially try to do is create smaller learning environments or teams within a larger school. And that's just to aid in the transition developmentally between when kids leave much smaller school settings at elementary school, enter middle school, and then ultimately make preparation to go on to the high school. And so to facilitate that, again, smaller learning environments we know to be beneficial. A big part of teaming is essentially being able to meet with groups of students, larger groups of students, for various programmatic purposes, for team building, for character education, for educational purposes. We don't have a space, which is hard to believe for a school the size of Henry James, where you could have a team of students congregate. Currently, given our present enrollment, teams are approximately 120 students. We have 6 teams at Henry James. We would hope for a space that would be large enough to accommodate a team. With the current proposal that's inclusive of an auditorium, that would satisfy that need, and that actually we were able to reduce the proposal for square footage with the library. Prior to the addition of the auditorium, we were actually looking at a much larger library concept, and that was really to fulfill that need around having common space where teams could meet and we can hold programs for students. So that's a very basic need that now we're hoping to accomplish through an auditorium. We'll talk a lot more about that momentarily, but before moving on, one thing I'll sort of touch upon as we go through this presentation is really the nature of education now. It's more collaborative in nature. It's more project-based. Later in the presentation, you'll hear about the concept of STEM, which is science, technology, engineering, and mathematics. That's also a concept that really integrates several different disciplines in a very collaborative way and facilitates learning through project-based learning, through student collaboration. That's very much the direction of education, and so we're looking to create spaces in our school that's conducive to that type of teaching and learning.
Thanks.
Can I interrupt for a second? So 120 students can't meet anywhere in the school now? Because
So-
I've been in the
The gym.
auditorium and in
So
the gym with
correct.
with
So-
way more people than that.
So
Cafeteria.
The cafeteria students can sit in. However, our cafeteria is in use throughout the day for classes. We actually run study halls during the day. So even that space outside of lunch waves has limited availability. We run 3 sections of PE in our gymnasium area throughout the day. So with the exception of 2 periods of time, even our gymnasium is inaccessible. It's a classroom space. It's a learning environment. To be very honest with you, when we have a need to meet, we utilize a foyer down by our DCE, and we essentially assemble on the floor. And so we have our students present in that foyer area because it's the one space that's not utilized for instructional use where we could physically hold that number of students. And so a little unusual, but that's how we currently function. So this slide here just presents a concept of what a new media center could be. It was really just an attempt to give folks a visual, just to sort of get their imaginations around what could be possible. This doesn't present a specific design or what it's actually going to be, but instead just to really give various audiences some idea of what's possible, given the input that we've had around what we need in the library. So this next slide just gives us an overview of some of the rationale around the need to modernize our classrooms. As I mentioned, much of our building is original 1957. That's true of our science classrooms. They were originally built in a very departmentalized fashion, so we have our science classrooms currently consolidated in one area of hallway on the first floor. Very typical of what a traditional high school design would be. The facilities themselves are original. They were conceived of as science classrooms to be used the way science was taught in the mid-1950s. Something now that we're preparing for is what's called the next generation science standards, and those standards really emphasize principles of engineering, physics, again, this theme of hands-on learning, project-based learning, collaborative learning is very much the direction we're in. We're hoping to build a collab concept, which is essentially an integration of a traditional classroom and a lab, which would be conducive to that type of curriculum and instruction. A modern concept would be more reliant on some of the technologies that are out there. We would hope to create spaces that not only allow the usage of our current technologies, but would be adaptable to future technologies as technology continues to evolve at a very fast rate. This slide here just gives you a pretty basic idea of what a CLAB could look like. One of the key features of this is, as you can see, the instructional space is clearly separate from the lab space within the same classroom. And so what you see is a more traditional design. You have sort of desks to the front, but also a classroom that could accommodate different types of hands-on project-based learning and science labs. A big part of this design is having flexible space. Instead of having permanent lab stations, having the ability for more modular type furniture where you could rearrange the classroom into different configurations to suit different types of lessons. This next slide just provides a little bit of a bulleted overview of our rationale for a school auditorium. One of the things that's really developed over a period of time here in Simsbury is a truly outstanding music and performing arts program. In fact, we're not only recognized regionally, but nationally. We have several concerts throughout the year that we have to attend over at Simsbury High School. In fact, tomorrow night, Henry James will have its orchestra concert at the high school. Angela Griffin, our Director of Music and Performing Arts, will often open those concerts by reminding the audience that we're actually nationally recognized as a community of excellence when it comes to our music programs, and it truly is something special. All of our students currently participate in the music program, and so what that means at Henry James is approximately 700 students take music. So when you consider the need for instructional space, although we're able to do it, there are some pretty significant limitations in how we accommodate different groups of students in our music education program. An auditorium would not only provide us with would meet the need for a space to congregate as a school, which we spoke about earlier, but it would give us a performance space and an instructional space that's needed just to accommodate our music program. It's pretty remarkable how the program has grown over time. For anyone in the room who's attended any of our performances, as I said, it's special. It's truly an outstanding program, and we feel it's worthy of its own performance space. A basic challenge we have is scheduling. Because we have so many large ensembles to accommodate, we are dependent on the high school, and the high school, being equally outstanding, has a space that's in use almost 24/7. It's very difficult for us to have access to the high school facility to meet our programmatic needs. We actually have a meeting that occurs around April where we're scheduled blocks of times and hours about a year in advance to gain access to the high school. So that's very real in terms of how we operate. We always enjoy having access to the high school facility. We feel that it's a space that's sort of worthy of the types of performances our students put on in terms of having an acoustically sound space. But again, the way the program has evolved over time, it is a real need at Henry James.
Do you ever use Eno?
We don't, and it's just my own familiarity with Eno. It's a capacity issue. We often run. So, for example, our chorus concert we ran last Wednesday. So, because of the size of the program, Henry James twice a year runs 3 separate concerts. The high school auditorium seats about 1,000. For our choral concert, we actually run 2 back-to-back concerts because we literally can't fit everybody. So we actually run 2 concerts in the same night because we exceed the capacity of 1,000 because of the number of folks that come out, parents and family members.
So you're talking just more from a practice perspective and a rehearsal?
Anytime, yeah,
Yeah.
Yeah.
because it's often empty.
So how many seats are you anticipating for the auditorium?
So I think if we go to, I want to go to the slide. Just a quick visual, you obviously can picture what auditoriums look like. The current seating that we're looking at is the minimum of about 550, right? And we had some further meetings recently. You see that when we look at some of the other districts and the seating of those middle schools, that is kind of right in the norm of that. So I don't believe that from a seating point of view, would quite reach that in terms of the
Are those
actual
like-sized?
performances.
Are those like-sized middle schools?
Oh, sure, they are. And so just to speak a little bit to this slide.
Are those schools in our DIRG?
Right.
They are. They're, just for the sake of comparison,
Dirk B.
we really did look around at comparable communities in terms of DIRG status. We also looked at schools that we felt were comparable in terms of scholastic achievement. And so we're very proud of our strong academic performance in Simsbury. We have very high-performing schools. We talk a lot about competitiveness. When we look at our comparable DIRG communities, we frequently compare the performance of our students with those of students in neighboring communities. It's fair to say that when we look at many of our neighboring towns and the types of facilities they're able to provide their schools, we're not as competitive. What we see is that many of the schools in the Farmington Valley region, but also similar communities, in fact, have these typical facilities, things like larger, more modern libraries, auditoriums.
It's also interesting to note that most of them have a sixth grade class in the middle school.
Sure. Sure.
Yeah, more students.
So we just think that's a very interesting point of comparison, just to see what, again, is sort of typical in like communities when it comes to facilities resources.
When you say all 700 students take music, is it part of the curriculum?
It is.
It is. And they're not taking music all at the same time, it's over the course of 2 years? Everybody will have taken at least one course, some multiple courses?
Well, it'd be multiple courses. So over the course of 2 years, you would take a music course in 7th and 8th grade. So there's 2 year-long course offerings in music. Many of our students choose to take multiple musics. And so one of the things we've accommodated over time, for example, if you're a student who has a passion for singing, but you also play the violin, we have a program that allows for students to pursue both avenues.
For both the violin and singing at the same time?
Correct. And so it's a requirement that all students participate in music. We currently offer orchestra, band, and chorus. We also offer a year-long course called Music Technology, which is essentially a music composition course. So we have some very impressive offerings, and again, we have a very large program.
Go back to you. Finish. Did you? I'm not sure whether you were done.
No, I
You
think
did?
so.
Okay.
I think so. I mean, really, the last bullet that we didn't speak to, and I think this was, Linda's point about just, community usage. One of the things that we've certainly talked about when we've considered the possibility of an auditorium at the middle school, and given the high level of demand currently for the space at the high school, as much as we see this as a daily instructional space and a performance venue for our middle school, we also see this as a resource that the town would certainly benefit from as well. And given the size of the space we're talking about, would probably lend itself to different types of performances, programs, and assemblies for the schools and for the town.
And what's the capacity that you're recommending? Do you have all this for us, the sort of the cost breakout and
I'm sorry. Are we talking about the auditorium?
the auditorium in particular?
Yeah. We had done the initial cost estimate way back last year, and I think they had assumed that it would be about 500 seats. We had an updated review with the music and performing arts folks, and I'm just questioning whether it was the 550. Is that?
That sounds right.
Does that seat the whole school at once or not?
So it wouldn't. And, I don't know, maybe Burke, you might know better than myself. I mean, when we consult with our architects, there's certain rules of thumb or guidelines that they follow from a design standpoint, and some of it is driven by what's reimbursable. But they essentially look at a total size of a school, and then there's a percentage of that overall size that they'll use to determine capacity. I don't know the formula for it, but just from our discussions with architects, that is something they look at. To some, it's counterintuitive, but I mean, it does come down to cost and other things.
So what is the added cost for the auditorium portion? Is that, I think you were asking?
Well, I
Just in terms of
eventually we
numbers.
want to know that, but,
Do we have an idea of the 22 million, if that's, the auditorium is?
It's really 23 million.
Yeah,
23 million.
It
22.8.
Okay.
was
Good point.
22.
Rounding up.
Yeah.
Right.
Well,
That's
you
another
don't just have
800,000.
a separate cost estimate for that one element.
Okay.
So over the summer, the board looked at a couple different options, several different options. And there was an option with and without. So by looking at the difference between those two, and where it gets, again, more confusing is, do you consider it net of reimbursement or not? And there's some estimating there. The range was between about 4.8 and 5.3 million. That was on their initial cost estimate. We're going to have a further level of design with a professional cost estimator done in order to get.
I know you didn't want to, but you said those numbers and we all wrote them down. So
Yeah, it was, so I had originally written auditorium at $3 to $3.5 million. That was, I'm assuming that was an estimate prior.
I think that was sort of a cookie cutter.
Estimate?
What would that element cost? This is taking two total cost estimates and saying, when you compare them, what is the net difference of one version that has it and one version that doesn't? None of those estimates can you point to it and say, well, there's a square foot cost within there. There's all those other elements of, once your project gets larger, there's other aspects that go up as well.
Bigger
So you can't
heating
just say,
system.
add this plus this plus this plus this. The only way to do it is essentially what
you had music rooms and other things that are part of this addition. I think that's what they did at the high school years ago.
Just the auditorium.
This-
The new footprint is just the auditorium, there's no
So-
other new stuff in it.
Correct, but to your point, I mean, there would certainly be some storage. I mean, it would be more than a stage and some seats, but not much more than a stage and some seats. Truthfully, we've really tried to keep it well within the scope.
Without getting into the design per se, and this is very conceptual, you see how this is the lobby area when you come in the DCE entrance. This is a band room. This is a chorus room, that sort of weird shaped room there, which is very easy to design around, right? So the hallways that come in here, this initial concept, this would actually have been dead space. Now we now have a design that incorporates and makes a lot more sense with the fact that you need to get audience in a separate way from the performers, for example. That there's a lobby-way there that, as I understood it, anticipated this as a future concept, which is why it was built that way when it was added on. But with these angles here, you have to have hallway areas that feed into this. So we're getting to that level now. You can understand that conceptually, to just have a ballpark number, there's a lot more design that has to go into it.
We should have built it in 1987 when we first moved to that. We didn't.
And that delta, Burke, is based on is gross. In other words, it's the 23 million versus some other number.
It is,
But it's not net of any reimbursements.
Correct.
It's
Okay.
both. It's both. So what I'm trying to say is that if you look at the gross, it's about 5.3.
Right.
If you look at the net, it's about 4.8.
Okay.
But how do you know that some of those reimbursement assumptions don't
Apply.
vary? So
Yeah.
let's just say that's a relatively small range.
Yeah.
Let's kind of.
It is, yep.
Let's speak in general terms. It's about $5 million.
Okay.
Probably.
But the reimbursement, I mean, if we're looking at about a 30% reimbursement rate, this would be fully reimbursable, this space, you would think, correct? Because
It
it's.
is a reimbursable space, but as Brian made reference to, there are certain caveats where they say they won't pay for certain things, or they won't pay for more seats than greater than a certain formula.
Okay.
So there's nothing that's ever just a yes or no answer. You have to look at the formulas a little bit and make sure that you're not stating something that has an exception.
And on the enrollment projections, you're at 700 now, so about 350 a class roughly.
Roughly.
Are we looking at, is that fairly steady in our middle schools? I mean, I know the population has been going down. Are
We're
we?
anticipating a decline, and so we'll be much closer to the low 600s in 2 to 3 years. What we've seen in terms of enrollment trends over the past few years has been interesting. The general projections we've been working off of in terms of decline have been pretty close. We've had a few summers where we've seen an unexpected uptick in the number of students, but the overall trend has been down. So next year, we're looking to be somewhere in the mid-600s and somewhat smaller in the next year or two after that.
Just not as steep of a decrease, not necessarily an increase, but the decrease isn't as fast.
Correct.
Correct. Would we have details of will you have more details of the numbers and the breakdown of each individual project then? Each individual scope?
I don't believe you're going to see, and that's not how cost estimates have been generated in my experience with public projects. But definitely there will be more detail of which you can interpret those aspects.
Okay.
So Burke, maybe just so for some context here, what are we trying to accomplish tonight?
Right.
And what is the timeline for this? Maybe give us some context for.
Sort of where I'm heading to, but just in this prior slide, just to show that, we've been trying to, between the superintendent and Brian as principal, trying to get the word out to the public. This is another opportunity this evening because it's televised. This presentation, was viewed by some who watched the Board of Education several months ago. But to this next slide, this was really a follow-up to the three-board meeting, and we certainly have heard for a number of months and into the last budget process that you were, very, very interested in hearing more about capital sooner. So while this isn't the final presentation, this is giving you sort of a better level of understanding of why would the project be, this price tag and what is the scope. Also want to point out that since we had that conversation, the SCTV project is obviously important to the senior center project. So the way it has been portrayed, and we are definitely in dialogue with the folks at SCTV, that they have a certain amount of space need, and working through the town engineer Jeff Shea, they relayed that, and as I understand it, it'll be sort of its own separate budget to move them out. And we have discussed. You go back to that schematic with the. I do my pointer here. Here we go. So having a separate entrance and one of the easiest areas to sort of add it on, it would make sense. If this is going to happen as a part of a Phase 3 Henry James project, would be to have the economies of scale of adding new space. Having that with its own entrance, this being the sort of the main roadway in, is just sort of the placeholder, but it would not be eligible unless there was some really strong argument that we were utilizing all of the space for instruction. We can't make that argument at this point in time. It doesn't mean that there wouldn't be good synergies, but they do have a need for their own space. So that's why it was not part of the cost estimates, and that's why we didn't include it back in the beginning, because it wasn't part of this project. It doesn't seem like it would be a hard thing to add on if you're building new construction. We definitely looked at aspects of, well, what about current space? But we've spent a lot of time looking at that, and really the only practical way that we could see would be to add it on and make it accessible, because there are things to be worked out in terms of access. If you're going to have a separate entity that needs access outside and not wanting to come through the school building.
Maybe for the sake of everyone on here, but certainly for me, I forget the details of what that whole, I know it's been discussed at the Board of Selectmen, but I thought there was something about using the space in the lower level of the library.
No, that was not correct. I have information that we discussed at the board, and I can pass this out. This will give you background.
Thanks, Lisa.
October 24th.
But that was once considered.
It was, yes.
It was not, because there's programmatic needs needed at the library, so if you use that for SCTV, they cannot use that space for programming.
So what was it that the library board
It was floated, but
agreed
never
to
really
do
followed
something different down there? And I
Well, we
just
haven't
forgetting.
yet proposed, and we're not ready to propose our CIP, so
Okay, I know at the Friends of the Library meeting,
No,
at
that's-
one
you're
point, there
right.
was a discussion
Yes.
about that, okay, they were going to be okay with doing something different in the
I
basement.
thought it
so-
was something to do with storing the books, correct?
So we have not voted on the final plan because it's way before that time in our budget process. So I don't want to get ahead of my board and speak for them. But we did have a discussion on the 24th of October where we talked about different aspects. My letter sort of lays out the history of it, and it's also online. But it lays out sort of where we were and some of the challenges. I do anticipate, although again, it hasn't come in yet because it's way ahead of the budget schedule. So it's unusual to have this conversation at this point, but I do expect, based on our conversations with the library board of trustees, town engineer, and town staff, that they are going to come in with a proposal to renovate the basement part of the library so that it can be used for programming, including senior programming, not just senior
Oh,
programming.
that was the
but
connection.
also community programming, because they do, if anyone's been to the library, what they're doing there is phenomenal, and they're growing and they have space needs. One of the things in thinking about exploring Eno, as we all know, parking is an issue there. So how do you relieve the parking? Well, if you're able to do some senior center programming at the library as part of their overall programming needs, then you alleviate some of the parking space. If you put SCTV there, we still have the parking problem. You still have a bigger parking problem. And you don't meet the needs of the library. They would then have to do an addition to meet their additional programming needs. So that is what I anticipate may come before the board, but again, I can't say it yet because it's way, way early. But my letter does sort of give a history, some of the thoughts, some of the obstacles we faced. Initially, the library could not do programming because they didn't permit charging of fees, and so they changed their library policy, coordinate with the state and make sure that that could be done. But they're now going to allow that so that the senior center can do some of their programming that requires a fee charge at the library. And so there's been a lot of working together and also working with Henry James. This is all part of many moving
Grand
parts
scheme.
that we've been working on for months. It's not done. We're not ready to present it yet, but these are some of the things you can see. And if you look at sort of the history and then our charge to the building committee, you'll get an idea of where the board is going as of, I guess October. And then we'll have more capital discussions as we get forward.
And that's really this process that I wanted to kind of try to give you that context that you were asking about. And so, with the understanding that from our charter and our process, the Board of Education by February 15th needs to submit to the Board of Selectmen its list of capital projects for consideration into the overall town CIP. But as is always the case, we start on an administrative level with the first selectman, the superintendent, myself, finance director, and we look at the administrative draft. And you gave us some feedback at the three-board meeting about looking at a 6.7% debt guideline to lower that from 7%. So we've had those conversations, and I know that it has to go through its own process on the Board of Selectmen side. We've started a process at our last Board of Education meeting looking at an initial draft of what if we pushed some projects out further, and based on the modeling that Sean and Matt and Lisa and I did, we could make a 6.7% work, but there's definitely impact on the prior list of projects, which we started to show visuals to the Board of Education. The caveat there, though, is that the 10 versus 15-year bonding issue is a factor for Henry James due to, obviously, it's much larger than anything else on the CIP. So that's, we're just trying to be true to what you asked about and have this dialogue there and show that we really are trying to make that work, because with the debt policy, we're not talking about individual projects. We're talking about that steady spending level, so that it's not causing spikes.
And if I can interject, Derek, obviously you weren't on the board and you guys were both not able to attend. If you haven't already watched last month's
I watched the
meeting.
board meeting. Yeah.
So when we talked about, keeping it at 6.7 rather than at 7, I know the way that when I worked with Sean, just playing around, how could we get there? One of the essentials was cutting $5 million out of the 22.8 that you had been hoping for, so just
Well,
so you
because it's a
know.
6-year schedule, you know, I
That's
think
not
what
the only
we've-
way to get there,
Right,
but it's pretty
we've
critical.
looked at
Yeah.
collectively, what are the other ways that the boards can get their priority projects
Yeah,
into that plan to try to fit.
yeah.
Okay.
Clearly, this is our Board of Ed priority project.
One other question, when I was looking at, this must have been something perhaps you sent out to the parents, explaining the need.
Sure, it's available on the website as well.
Their support. When you look at the busing for students, moving equipment, continual resetting the stage, multiple people, constituents need to coordinate and communicate, scheduling, and a number of these extremely onerous tasks that would be eliminated with all this additional space. Have you been able to calculate the FTE savings that might be associated with that? And if not, would it be something that you might be able to provide in the future so that we have a better sense of whether are we looking at increased programming and therefore increases in the budget for even greater or more expanded music offerings? For example, are you looking at break even? Are you looking at perhaps saving money with not having to bus students and not having to have multiple constituents? You know, I mean, is it going to
Sure.
free up like one FTE who does all the scheduling now to, because it looks like it's a nightmare right now.
Sure, so I think in the interim, in terms of any sort of FTE savings that could be accomplished through the project, I don't know that there would be any immediate savings as a result of the project specific to staffing and FTE. In terms of real cost, I mean, yes, the busing component could represent a potential savings. What that really refers to is at various times in the year when we have to rely on the high school facility, it is literally an orchestrated effort to transport kids and equipment between buildings for the purpose of performances. In terms of access to stage, we have a very well-developed musical, which we run every year. Again, being in the high school, you know, does present some logistical challenges. We've been able to make it work, but over time as we've grown, it's become harder and harder to do that well. So in terms of equating this with any, you know, potential savings in terms of staffing, I'm not sure that you would benefit that way. However, as we see a reduction in enrollment, we continue to look at our staffing levels appropriately. One of the aims in our project would be to preserve the current level of programming. I don't necessarily anticipate an expansion of, but certainly having a better facility at our school would allow us to not expand the program, but perhaps offer more diverse programming in terms of student choice and the types of music programs offered.
That's fair.
Yeah, we need to keep moving. We got a lot to talk about.
One of the things I'll be looking for as we go forward also, though, is the impact on your operating budgets of both the renovated space at the library, if should that come forward, and also the operating costs of these new additions that you're proposing.
Yeah, more heat, more everything.
Yeah,
Yeah, run all the way through the budget, not just the capital.
Yeah.
correct.
More maintenance,
yeah.
more janitorial.
Operating.
Yeah.
Maybe some efficiencies, too.
Yeah.
Be nice.
All right.
So thank you so much for your time. See you.
Great.
Happy
Thank you.
holidays.
Thank you. All right.
Feeling like you just got shot.
So the next up on our agenda is the CNR policy discussion and possible approval. And I want to thank Jeff for having done most of the heavy lifting, all of the heavy lifting here.
No, some help.
A lot. You know, I wanted to, so I've been through, I guess maybe we just open it for questions and comments. I think when we last started to talk about this, I had some issues with it, and I guess I've sort of come around to think that this is really what we need to do for the time being. I have questions about the capital non-recurring, the way we do this, but I think the way the policy is written is certainly cleaner, crisper, and much
And
better
at least it
than
reflects
was.
what we actually do.
Yeah.
Because right now, we're in violation of our own
And if it's
policy.
on one page.
Right. So I guess I just had a question on 2C, just the non-recurring means an expenditure that occurs no more frequently than once in a 5-year period. Has that been an issue in the past?
Isn't there a state statute that defines non-recurring that we have to follow?
I believe that's in the state statute, yes.
Yeah, there is,
So
he
then
had it
that's the state
attached
statute.
originally.
Yeah, it wasn't my
We should
initial
cite
initial
that, though.
version. yeah.
Okay.
I think.
Yep.
Yeah, I did have,
So that would be my only question then.
state
Is
the
there,
question again.
is there a state statute?
There is. It used to be, it was attached
Yeah.
when he first
I
gave
had
it to
attached
all of
our
us.
other,
Okay.
yeah.
It got deleted somehow.
Okay.
So I'm okay with the policy, the way it's redone. I think it seems consistent, Sean, with the way we are actually doing things, which is always sort of a good thing, have a policy that's consistent the way we do it. But I did want to just raise a couple of issues relative to the things that where we find ourselves now with the budgets and the like. So with Sean's help today, he sent me these, and I'll pass these out. We've all seen these. These are the items that we spread out over 5 years. And, yeah, sorry. And I didn't mark everybody's, but I marked mine. But if you look on the third page, second and third page at the bottom, for the non-recurring fund budget, so we have a dump truck with plow in the first column, right here. And then we add a truck every year. Almost every year. Plow truck, plow truck, plow truck, $150,000. And then what we do is, we take it and we divide it by 5 and put $30,000 in each year. And when we're done doing all of that, adding and dividing, we get down to the bottom and we spend $520,000, $570,000, $570,000, $570,000, $635,000. So it seems like we are doing a lot of buying a truck, spending it over, 5 years, buy another truck next year, spread it out over 5 years. And are we really accomplishing the goal? Now, I understand why we did this, and I wasn't here, Jeff, for the historic context, but I understood that we would not buy,
None of us were.
in order to make budgets, we wouldn't buy any trucks until all the trucks were bad, and then we needed 5 or 10 trucks. And so we'd bust the budget, every 6 or 7 years instead of every year. But I just wonder if this spreading it out over 5 years really makes sense if in fact we buy a new truck every year, which is.
And hence that's the question with C, 2C, if we're buying something more than
Which is-
once in a
yeah.
5-year period.
Right, right.
I totally agree, but the problem is, once you've speeded it up, or, once you've slowed down those payments, to undo it requires
Agreed.
speeding it up.
Agreed.
And
And
so
that's-
you're kind of
yeah.
screwed forever to
Forever,
be blunt.
forever is a long time.
But unless you have a big surplus.
I completely agree with you, Linda. I would not want to try to hold up the updating of this policy. That was not my intent at all, because I think the policy now properly reflects what we are doing. But I think we could give some thought to, and you're right, it would take.
Preventing ever doing it again for anything
Well, it would
else,
take
yes.
5 years to undo it, or explaining it, if we did it all at once, would be painful. I get
Well,
it.
it's like
But
when we
the idea that we
adjusted our
buy $150,000 truck every year and spread it out over 5 years and buy another $150,000 truck the next year sort of defeats the purpose,
Right.
unless the purpose was not to buy no trucks and then wait till they all broke down. So I think we have accomplished the goal.
Well, there is a secondary benefit to doing it this way, and I'm not one to want to do these games that got played, but the secondary benefit is that it creates a disincentive, or at least it doesn't create an incentive for people in a bad year to defer maintenance and defer normal purchases. Because they're only going to get 1/5 of the savings that they would get if they said, well, we just won't buy that truck this year, which
I
pushes
think
it
that
off
works
into
both
next
ways,
year.
though, which is, let's go ahead and we buy another truck. It only costs us $30,000 this year on this year's budget, although it's a $150,000 truck. So I think it cuts both ways. I think But I think that's a discussion for another day. But
Yeah, we don't have the surplus to
Yeah, I
play
think the
with now.
concern is that, the statute was enacted, long before any of us, I think, were on the board, the CNR policy was established, and so, as Linda said, it would have impact now to not utilize it, a more draconian impact than if we had been going along, kind of business as usual. We did, though, address that issue, and I don't remember if it was a prior meeting or when we were meeting with Sean, which is that if we are buying a new bus, for example, each year, are we really looking at something that occurs only every 5 years? And I guess what we're thinking was, well, each bus lasts, I believe, what was the average lifespan of a bus?
We have
Many years.
average buses that are 8 to 10 years.
8 to 10 years. So we were thinking, okay, so we're really looking at kind of each bus, and so we're really spreading out the amounts. And each bus is an expenditure, like, I don't know, bus 21, for whatever route, that only occurs every 7, 8, 9 years. So that's how we viewed it. But you're right, I mean, if
Is
they're
there-
interchangeable, then it's a little different.
is there a dollar limit? So we have this, to be
Yes.
must $10,000. That's not very much money, right? Each item or supply of like items that must exceed $10,000. Is that the right number? Because what you get is a lot of stuff that $10,000 that's spread out over 5 years, some of which won't. If you can find the Citrix server that we bought in 12-13 and tell me it's still working, I'd be shocked. But, it was $13,000, and we took, that was quick, what's the quick math on that? Come on, 16.
600?
20, yeah, very good, very good. Not bad for a lawyer.
I know.
All right.
Yeah,
So that's my only point, was that there's a $150,000 truck here almost every year. What are we really accomplishing by doing that? So,
Would you like to add language that makes it more difficult to do this with items in the future that aren't already in CNR? I mean, while it's difficult to undo what's already in CNR, I'm totally with you about let's not start adding additional things as a
Well,
way to take stuff out of the operating budget.
And we could increase the amount too. I mean, 10,000 is a low amount, which is something that we had.
that's where I'd
to.
start. I think $10,000 is.
It is low.
Bump it up.
Sean showed me the ad he had to run where he had the 4 or 5 years of budgets that, you print in the newspaper, right?
There were a bunch of smaller items that we did out of CNR because that's where the money was.
Could that number be $50,000? What would happen there?
That's what I was thinking.
I mean, that's the way historically the town has always, on the Board of Selectmen side, shown each individual line item. On the Board of Ed side, they're more, I think, grouped in categories. We can talk to you, but certainly, I mean, just on that advertising piece on possibly grouping ours,
Yeah.
really doesn't cost us $4 a line.
Yeah.
This thing in paper. But that's sort of a separate issue, but
Yeah.
certainly, raising minimum, you'll see in a couple of years past, it hasn't been above 10,000, I know the policy was 7,500, there's been a few purchases that have been even under that amount.
I just want to be
Yes,
careful that we don't screw up the Board of Selectmen because they're used, I'm looking at this list, which I appreciate you
this is great.
asking for. There's boilers and all kinds of stuff in there that are 10,000 or less, trailers and the like, and if that's all stuff that has at least in recent history, not been in the operating budget of the town, and we change this year, that means this year their operating budget has to go up by that amount for any of these similar items.
That's right.
So especially in this year where we
Well-
know the operating budget is already really, really tight, I don't want to make it worse.
I guess I'm coming at this a little bit differently, which is that I'm going to give Burke kudos here. He's put, and it's not, there's two very different styles the way these two things, the same approach. Burke puts 4 big things: buses, vehicles, and equipment, in a round number. Lisa puts park maintenance equipment, library maintenance equipment, golf course maintenance equipment, each one has its own line. And they're $5,000, $25,000, $75,000.
Because she has to budget by line item.
I have a
He
line item
doesn't.
budget, which is why I do that, and why they don't.
And they don't.
Right.
Right.
So we can't,
We can't make this easier for you. for
I would
you.
love it if we could. I would be all for that. I mean, I think Linda's point is accurate. I don't have anywhere else in my budget to put the boiler other than to increase my operating budget by 10,000. And that would be a series of, were we starting this from scratch? To your point on the snowplow, you would have an operating line item for a snowplow every year.
Right.
You're right.
Right.
I would absolutely do that. And to Linda's point, how could we get there? It's very difficult to get there this year, and it's expensive. If we were starting from scratch, you guys are exactly right. And that's a call for you guys to make in terms of that, but it will impact taxes and operating budget, because I can't not buy the snowplow.
You could graduate it.
Well, yeah, that's probably not, that's exactly, I'm introducing the topic without a solution and not recommending we do anything about it tonight, other than recognize that it's probably not optimal the way we've done it.
Correct.
I agree.
Although I have to say, it probably did fix the don't buy any buses until we need 5. But I think it's a little bit of a fiction that we're carrying forward. We're still paying for stuff we bought 4 years ago. So 6 of one, half dozen of another. We've been in a very disinflationary period, and we're headed into a period where the buses and trucks and everything over the next 5 years. 5 years from now, that truck is going to cost $180,000 instead of $150,000. And so, but we'll still, so in that way, we're pushing. If we had to pay $180,000 this year for the truck instead of how much quick? About 36,000.
and I think ours is also lower than in other towns. Other towns, somewhere 3%, I think. Don't watch. I look at West
Yes,
Hartford.
yeah, that's
so
right, when we looked that up.
look that up. So we are lower, certainly, than those towns.
We don't abuse it as much as other towns.
So let's go back to the general policy. What if we raise this to $25,000?
Well, again,
It's going to impact my operating budget.
push
so-
more of her stuff
I
into
mean, as long
our
as you hold me
operating budget.
harmless there, I'm fine on that. If you want to say, but you saw the projections that Barbara ran, it's going to be a tough budget year. On the other hand, $15,000 on a $95 million budget, it's not really material. So as long as you hold us I think that's a policy call for you, with the recognition that I'm not going to be able to.
Well, but it's not just us 15, there's several items that
That's
would
right.
get knocked off, so it would add up to a lot more than $15,000 in your operating budget.
It would.
And I don't know, if hold harmless probably would not carry over year to year.
We'd
It
have,
is smoothing
Right.
period.
I mean, I'd be inclined to, until we're out of the woods with the Hartford, with the loss of their revenue, I'd say just leave the 10,000 in place, and once we're in better shape, then we try to bring it up. You okay with that?
A few more buildings and machines than the Board of Ed, because that's what we do. We're
Right.
not as teachers, we don't have as many employees, but we've got a lot more stuff than the Board of Ed, because that's the way it works.
we need a more comprehensive solution than going from 10,000 to 25,000. If we're going to smooth this curve. Well, we've smoothed the curve to the point where it's almost, so it's a lot of accounting work for not much benefit, is my point.
The other piece I might add, I did tell us that I'm working through the audit as we speak, and getting a better handle on, obviously my first time through, but it is possible there will be a fund balance in our CNR policy. So this, over time, if some of these projects have come in under budget, conceivably, we've moved the cash in there. There may be an accrued fund balance in there that we might be able to take advantage of for some smoothing. I don't know what that is yet, but as we're hopefully in the next 2 weeks wrapping up, we should have some more solid numbers where we could maybe.
And that's actually why we added the language in 2D,
Right.
because sometimes there are unexpended funds that kind of
Language.
and don't come back to us for long periods of time. And
Right, which is how
said,
the
let's
fund
not
was
do
originally.
that.
Right, it's how it's designed. I mean, I think, and so in that example, if there was, say, 150,000 of fund balance available, you could do an appropriation for the plow truck 1 year and make that transfer out of the CNR's fund balance and help smooth,
Yep.
one less year of chargebacks
Right.
and then try to get it into the operating budget or whatever the solution is.
Oh, that's interesting, yeah.
All right. Any other questions or comments?
So, just, I guess the only question would be that if we adopt this policy tonight, this will be for projects going forward. But I think still the expectation is that if we have funds that have not been expended following 2 years from approval, that we will begin to hopefully reconcile and close those
Repatriate.
out.
Right.
Good.
All right, do we need a motion to that effect then?
Yep.
To adopt this?
I move that we adopt this policy as is, as presented.
Second?
Second?
All in favor, say aye.
Aye. Yahoo, one down, 7 to go?
This was one of the oldest, though.
What's up next?
I
Where's
didn't bring
Barbara?
my list. No, I'm the list keeper on that one.
Oh, you are,
Sorry,
okay.
but
The reserve policy we did in the last couple, I mean, this was, I think this is the oldest, but in terms of updating.
So, Linda, could I ask you to inform the rest of the
Sure.
board members what
Absolutely.
is up next?
Yep.
And who's responsible for it?
Yep.
Okay. And we did say that we wanted to try to get at least this one out of the way. What's on tap for our January meeting?
In terms of agenda items?
Yeah. All right, so let's.
You won't have the auditors yet, that probably be
Okay,
the
so
next meeting.
I'll ask Linda to pick the next one, and whoever is
Yeah.
supposed to do it.
Yep.
And then let's try to have it ready to look at for January, and we will have at least gotten the two. I'll let you make the judgment it calls, which.
yeah, we had
oldest,
them, we had
most-
an order on them, so whatever the order was before, but
You
I'll
wanna
just
stay
send
with
it out,
Okay.
yep.
All right. Okay. Update on retirement plan subcommittee. Well, that would be me, I guess.
You and Kevin.
Right. But the problem is the meeting is tomorrow.
But, well, so the reason we put it there is because we haven't had an update, like, ever.
Well, all right, so I'll give you the little bit that I have.
You could put that for next month if you need to,
Right.
but.
Well, we
just-
certainly will have more to talk about. I would say the main thing that the subcommittee is talking about is that help me here, Kevin, the smaller of the two funds for
OPEB.
the OPEB has been invested without a lot of management, just sort of indexed funds. And the discussion tomorrow will include considerations about having that become more professionally managed. It's grown from, I don't even have an idea what number.
It's about 12 to almost $13 million.
Yeah, so it got into double-digit millions, and it's probably worth now more professionally managing than just pure index funds. So that's a topic for tomorrow.
I know one of the other topics, well, two. One is that the policies, those two policies are really outdated and not compatible with each other. So those need to be looked at, and that was something I thought your committee would probably want to weigh in on. But secondly, that what the discount rate is, they're not the same. And so they're, right?
They are now the same.
They are now the
You guys
same?
took action in the spring to make.
Okay,
it.
I forgot.
They're both at 7%.
Okay,
Yeah.
they're both at 7. All right, good, thanks.
Yeah.
That's right, we did second. Yeah.
And we'll have a more thorough update for you at the January meeting.
Okay, great.
All right?
Excellent.
All right. I would like to suggest that Linda and I are now both on the, what do you call that committee that we, the Parks and Rec?
Oh, Simsbury Farms, yeah.
Simsbury Farms Committee, and this, that maybe somebody else could help with the.
The pension? Geez,
Yeah.
I think there's a new guy who has pension expertise on this committee.
So you
I'll
got
have to help out.
nothing else to do at 7
Awesome.
7 o'clock in the morning.
7 o'clock tomorrow morning?
Oh, no, not tomorrow.
7 a.m., that's uncivilized.
Yeah. No, it's actually, it's not, but I,
About 7:30.
I think they actually
Spoken
have,
like a
they bring
retiree.
refreshments.
They do.
Hope I'm not late.
But, yeah, maybe Derek, we could talk about having you take that position. That'd be great.
Yeah,
All right.
awesome.
All right, good. Approval of supplemental appropriation for solar array at Simsbury High School.
I had a question on this. Well, I guess maybe present, you've got probably a brief presentation first.
I was going to sort of try to stand in for Tom Roy, who has been taking the lead on this project for several years, and I've been trying to assist him. This really goes back to the town's clean energy task force and the earning of this grant for $40,500 for the solar panels. This is something that was essentially earned by the residents who chose the clean energy options. And then it was tied to, we learned, Tom being the one who bore the brunt of this, the Clean Communities Pledge, which the town signed several years prior, was a prerequisite for being able to get this grant. And the Board of Education, was part of that Clean Energy Pledge process. And so now the task force felt that to locate this panel, they wanted to have it at the high school, which was their choice because they saw it as a benefit. You could have some educational opportunities also because you get to sort of have live meter readings and so forth and learn about the process. So we ultimately had quotes from a prior vendor. We now have a new vendor that we've been able to get our current quote for, and the total cost is about $57,000, just over $57,000, and ultimately this project would be paid for both from the grant as well as the non-lapsing account monies. For those of you who were on the board when we first put the energy efficiency projects that we did, we have earmarked about $18,000 that we were waiting for this solar project. So this will be the last of that initial non-lapsing money, and those are the two funding sources. So my understanding, speaking with Deb Sweeney from the finance office, was that there needed to be a supplemental appropriation for the whole amount, because essentially it'll be tracked as a town project in that whole amount, and it'll come out of two different sources. So there were steps that had to take place that the Board of Selectmen did last week, and authorized Lisa to sign the MOA with the Connecticut Green Bank, which is the source of the funding. So as you see, the exhibit here spells out some of those prior steps, and we're looking for this approval from the Board of Finance so we can then sign the MOA and receive these funds and start this project, which we hope would be able to happen this spring.
Burke, my only question would be the effect on the operating budget. I think at some point we had asked when any project is brought forward.
Yep.
I think it had to do with the police and the chest cams,
Yeah.
something. But when the project is brought forward, that what the effect is on the operating budget.
So the estimated savings, I believe, was about $2,500 based on the size of this just under 15 kilowatt photovoltaic system, and it would be located on the new gymnasium area.
So is there a cost associated with it
For
to
running it?
maintain it?
There really are no known annual maintenance costs. Anything that, would need to be done would ultimately be up to the Board of Education to cover. But, this would generate, power and savings of roughly $2,500 per year is what they've estimated.
Estimated the electricity savings.
So we all wrote down zero costs.
Right.
Yeah.
This is truly a spend, it fits the spend to
It's spend to
save
save stuff.
definition
Yeah.
that you've talked about
Yeah.
previously.
Understood.
We,
Yep.
No, we get it.
we're getting a big boost from the residents who made those choices all over a period of time and now finally getting this grant opportunity. And
What's
that's-
the useful life, Burke, of the solar panel?
I believe it's about 20 years.
My only question was related to the timing. We can appropriate taxpayer money only, not grant money. So, again, I'm assuming what we do is we appropriate the full amount, then we receive the grant money afterwards to reimburse, and then that grant money goes into the general fund to correct, to reimburse.
Not a special purpose fund.
To reimburse for the, right.
Well, we would, I don't know if you want to,
I'll let you, because you and Deb are going to handle the
Right.
funds, so I don't want to.
yeah, this one's a little unique. I mean, and in this case, the grant, we have Section 809A of the Charter allows for the supplemental appropriations when there is a state, when it'll be funded wholly or in part by a state or federal grant. Obviously, in this case, there's sort of two funding sources, but we would, we need an appropriation to spend the money anyway. Typically, we'll get these grants as reimbursable grants, so we like to have an appropriation up front so that we know we have the authority to spend the money, and especially if something happens to the grant, it doesn't come through, or something else happens, we've had the conversation and approved the purchase. In this case,
The money's already in the account.
right, and I think what we would be basically doing is making an appropriation using, using the non-lapsing fund, so to speak, to charge the expenditures against, but then reimbursing it through the grant, just from an accounting standpoint, reimbursing it with that 40,000 or 42,000, and then the balance would be paid by the funds in the non-lapsing account,
So the.
short of setting up a special revenue fund.
So the 40,500 then will go into the non-lapsing fund. I mean, in other words, we're not appropriating just the I thought we'd just be appropriating the difference if we already had the money of roughly 17,000, but it sounds like.
Right, I mean, you could do it, I guess you could do it either way. We're and I could talk to my assistant finance director too, to see if she's had different thoughts on this yesterday, but we, the other alternative is just to appropriate it and increase one of your budget lines, and then reimburse the general fund for the amount, so that there's a net difference there, but then charge the balance, the 17,000 to the non-lapsing account, either way. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I'm just thinking that 40,500 was for townwide participation, so.
We need an account number, right? Right.
So if we were to make a motion, what would the motion, how would the motion sound?
I think it's the third bullet from the memo, which is requesting that the Board of Finance create a supplemental appropriation for $57,074 to allow for the expenditures for this project. It combines two sources, but it's one project, and it gives us collectively the authorization to move forward.
So stated.
I move that.
And I'll second what she moved.
Can you, as a chair? or-
I don't know, maybe
I don't think so. I think I can
think it's
second.
somebody else.
I second, yeah, yeah.
All right. All right, so it's been moved and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Okay. Are there any other items for us to discuss tonight?
Just one request. Burke, I know you do sort of quarterly updates. I don't know when your next one is.
We will do our second quarter update at the January 4th Board of Ed meeting, and what we typically do is provide you with a quarterly update as soon as we've updated them.
Okay, so on your next one, you'll also update us on where all your various cost saving things are. I haven't heard on that for a while. Okay.
I guess, well, the only other comment I had was that I did have a good discussion with Burke and certain members of the Board of Education following the last meeting for having, I guess, engaged in some polarizing behavior, which was not my intent. And so I mention that only because we do have, under state statute, the obligation to receive and vet and review cost-saving ideas from the Board of Education. But ultimately, at the end of the day, I do understand we need to determine what the mill rate will be, what we can and can't tolerate, we believe, from a community perspective in terms of the tax burden on our residents and businesses, and then rely on the respective boards to make their decisions about how that gets translated. That's ultimately not for us, and I get that completely. But at the same time, it's just useful if we do have input from the two boards that reflects kind of what our needs are, that addresses those. And so, for example, I mean, Kevin mentioned, what is the all-in cost down the road if we're expending money on capital now, then what are the operating cost differentials? And I think just, in the interest of cooperation, it's just very important, I think, to have some open dialogue about what are nice-to-haves versus what do we really need. That's helpful to us, that when we reflect on what, as a community, the taxpayers want to, what will they tolerate? I think we understand they'll tolerate necessities, and if there are some things that are nice to haves, we've got to balance that. And so, if you give us the information we needed, it's just helpful. That's all.
All right. Thanks, Joe.
I'll make a motion to adjourn the meeting.
I second that.
All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Good.
Because I offended some members of the education.
It's going to happen. Thanks, Lisa. Thanks, Joe.
I didn't even read the cars at the beginning of our meeting.
Hey, Rob.
Yeah, that's what, I mean, from my perspective, it's time.
Yeah, so I mean, I want to be.
Oh, I get it.
Just get it emailed?
I mean, right.
Do you get it?
Go out for RFP.